Welcome to the Sharp Betting Pod presented by Odds Jam with your hosts Randall and Steve. You can follow us on Twitter at SharpBettingOJ. Today we're back for episode 4 this week to prepare you for the NFL this Sunday. And for today's episode, we are going to go through the NFL games that we like for this Sunday, as well as give you some players we expect to have good games on Sunday from a fantasy perspective, as well as a player prop perspective. And today we also have a special guest from Twitter at Monotone Football with one L. And he's here to share his thoughts on some games as well as some player props that he likes this week. So, Stuart, hey, we're glad to have you joined in. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate you guys having me on. So for anyone that doesn't know me, I do mostly player props over on Twitter at Monotone Football. I'm doing it for the NFL season completely free, and we've also got the NBA starting up just around the corner. If you're not into that, I also do game previews for a couple sites like Vegas Insider and the Game Day NFL. That's more your traditional spread betting content, along with some college football stuff too. So that's really what you need to know about me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like I said, we appreciate you coming on and look forward to hearing your insight here on the games that we picked out. Steve, how's it going for you?
Going well. What is this podcast number 4 for us now? So excited to have our first guest. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for coming on. And looking forward to having a little bit of a bounce back week after sweeping the board in week 4, but coming back down to earth last week. But there's a few games I really like this week, so I'm feeling good. Last week, it seemed hard and it was hard. This week, I'm feeling pretty confident.
Yeah, and that's the one thing with the NFL. It'll humble you very quickly from week to week. So the first game that I wanted to discuss with you guys was the Cowboys and Patriots. Cowboys come into this game 4-1 against the spread. They've looked great, here these last 5 weeks. And last week, I know, Steve, you and I thought that it was a good spot for the Giants. And I think, barring the Saquon Barkley injury as well as the Daniel Jones injury and then top with Galladay, I think that, the Giants made that a little bit closer. Maybe they could have covered that game. So the Cowboys, they come to this game, they're riding high. America's team, everybody loves them. Can't get enough of the Cowboys. I think that, this is somewhat of a sell spot on them. That number opened as we talked on our last podcast at Cowboys -1, got bet all the way up to 4, and it looks like it's down to 3.5 now. So, the value is down a little bit from the +4 that we talked about earlier in the week. The Patriots are coming off of a narrow win against the Texans. That was one game that we definitely were all over last week. We expected it to be close. We expected the Patriots to be flat. We expected the Patriots to win. However, Davis Mills looked amazing. I was looking at the stats now that we're doing fantasy, and he was the number 3 ranked quarterback, I think, last week from a fantasy perspective. So he was kind of throwing the ball all over the yard, and I think that this week, that line is very enticing. If you're wanting to take the Cowboys -3, I'm not sure we see 2.5, but nonetheless, I like the Patriots in this spot. I think that, coming off that narrow win, I think that, the general public and the betting public, not as high on them as they were maybe last week. And I think there's a definite good spot here to back the Patriots. What are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'm with you. I locked them in at 4 after the pod. I still like them at 3.5. I think this game's going to probably come down to a field goal either way. So, if that's the case, whoever wins. But I think, if you look back, granted, a lot of these games were with Brady, but, the Pats at home as an underdog, I think they're like 10-2 the last 12. So it's just a great spot, like you said. And, yeah, the Cowboys have definitely reached their pinnacle. My numbers, I was on point with the opener as, Dallas -1, getting the Pats across that key number 3. That's just too too much for me to pass on, and this is my favorite game of the week. So I already locked it in, and I think anything 3.5 or higher is a great bet.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Stuart, you got any thoughts on this Cowboys Patriots game?
Yeah, so I'm coming in from a slightly different angle than you guys right here. I think I might be buying the Cowboys a little bit more than both of you two, and even beyond that too. The Patriots, I still think they're getting a little bit too much credit from the public. We saw them play a very competitive game against a very publicly favored Tampa Bay team, and then I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking the Houston game, saying, "Oh, that doesn't really matter much," which I think is fair. But I'm not as high on this Patriots team as the rest of the world. I do like Mac Jones. I'm a fan of what he's doing so far, but he's also not lighting the world on fire. A guy is Jacoby Brissett. They have very similar throw charts, a lot of dink and dunk, not left field too much. And I think that's going to be a little bit harder to do against the Cowboys. I think it's going to be hard to establish the run against the Cowboys, and that pass defense has been very good so far. So I would lean Cowboys -3, but since it's around -4 or -3.5, I'm not going to pay above the hook. So it's probably just a no bet for me right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you bring up a great point, with that Dallas offense, or I guess the Patriots offense, that is one of my concerns, I guess, in this game is if the Patriots can actually, stay with Dallas, and ultimately it's going to come down to Patriots defense getting stops and, keeping that Dallas offense off the field. So,
Yeah, but the Pats were down 4 linemen last week too, and they're getting at least 3 back, so that'll be huge. Like as I talked about, that's a typically overlooked aspect. So yeah, I mean, I think as long as their line's healthy,
yeah.
But
yeah, line's definitely huge in the NFL. So,
yeah.
the next game that I wanted to discuss with you guys was the Bears and the Packers. Last week we talked about the scheduling spot with the Packers, not being favorable. We locked in the Bengals +4. That game lands 3, closed Packers -2. So the Packers are off a narrow win. Back-to-back road games. This is another team that's not very healthy across the board. I mean, they're getting there, and I think that we'll see a similar team like we did with Tampa last year down the stretch. The Bears come into this game, having won 2 in a row. The Bears have some revenge from last year. They were swept by Green Bay. This line, I think, opened up Green Bay -4, 4.5. It looks like right before we started recording, I checked this, and the Bears are now catching 5.5. I heard something today that maybe Dalton, might be playing in that game. I don't know. I haven't actually looked into that. I would much prefer Fields in this spot if I'm going to take the Bears, but I liked what Fields has done. In looking at that win against the Raiders last week, and then all of the, nonsense that followed that game with Gruden, you have to wonder if maybe the Raiders quit in that game. I do think the Bears defense is much improved, from the first couple of weeks, especially in that LA game. I think they made some improvements. They obviously struggled at Cleveland, and that was Justin Fields, first road game, but they've kind of got it together here these last couple of games against the Lions and against the Raiders, who had a high-powered offense. But again, like I said, not sure. Maybe the Raiders quit. That's something that we obviously don't know. But I would have to lean to the Bears in this spot. Would definitely like to see the quarterback position goes. But what are your thoughts here, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, again, I love this Packers team long-term potential. Like, I do think that they probably end up winning the West, or winning the NFC rather. But yeah, I mean, in this game, I mean, the same reason why we liked the Bengals last week. I mean, this Packers team, I mean, the defense is banged up, and the Bears should be able to run against them. And this is a team that's just won a lot of games in dramatic fashion. I mean, last week was another case of that. We saw the same thing against that San Fran team. And, like, what has Green Bay really done? I mean, if you look at a lot of their wins, I mean, it's really not impressive, the teams that they beat. So I think, I think they're a little bit overrated here. And, I could see this being another field goal type game. I don't know if I really want to be fading Rodgers right now. It's going to depend on the injury report because, like right now, Mack and Hicks are both questionable. So I'd need both of them to play because if not, Rodgers is going to have all day. Like, we saw it last week. When he's under pressure, that's when he's at his worst. Like he just gets pissed off and he just starts pouting and, he just his demeanor changes. And, the thing is, like, as you said, like he's absolutely owned the Bears with Nagy. He's always heavily motivated to beat them. And this is a huge game for the North. I mean, the winner here is in first place, so this is a big game. This isn't a game where the Packers can come in and dick off like they did last week against the Bengals. So yeah, I got to see the injury reports. Right now, I probably would lean the Bears +5, but this is probably a game that I won't end up betting.
Yeah,
Stuart, do you have any opinion on
like I
this?
said, a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely with you guys right here. Actually, I mean, this feels like a field goal game. This feels like a 2-point game, a 3-point game. The Bears defense is good. This isn't a team that I was very high on at the beginning of the year. I didn't think their defense. I thought it was living on name value a little bit more than anything else. But they proved me wrong this year. Their secondary's been pretty good, and Hicks and Mack is a big thing. So I agree with you. I'm waiting on the injury report, but I could actually see my Bears by the end of the week, especially if that line somehow creeps up to 6 and crazier things have happened. The public loved the Packers last week. I think they probably love them again. I want to see more from Fields. I don't like this playbook. I don't like what they're doing on offense, but it doesn't seem to matter. It seems like they're going to play close games either way. I know a Rodgers explosion week is coming sometime soon, but I think the pace of play in this game is just going to be super slow. I don't think this is going to be the most fun game in the world, but I think we get a Bears cover right here.
Yeah, and Bears games are they've been pretty frustrating to watch the last couple of years if you've had any money on them at all. It seems like you said, very slow paced. The offense is very vanilla, and if they get behind, it's a team that is going to definitely struggle, to get back in the game. So the last game that I had, we'll move on to some fantasy talk. The Bengals Lions game, it's not a marquee matchup, but it's another game where this scheduling trend that I've alluded to, last week and in some other videos that I've done. So the Bengals come into this game, an out of conference road game, followed by a divisional road game at the Ravens. This is a spot Bengals coming off of a close loss, Lions also as well, but the Bengals, that was a game that, if they win, I know we talked, Steve, that we would be all over the Lions in this spot. But, in the fashion that they lost that game, it makes me like the Lions, just about probably as much as I would have had the Bengals, in fact, won that game. The Lions did have an emotional loss. I've said numerous times that I think Dan Campbell is a total clown for the Lions. And, I have no interest in really backing a guy who shows up to a, news conference wearing a damn racing helmet, doing up downs with his team. The players are not engaged at all. It just seems like a total clown show up there in Detroit. But I think that, if there's a spot to back the Lions, he's crying last week, at the podium about, how much effort this team gave. And, I think a lot of that is just show. But I think, the Lions, they play hard. We've seen it from them. They were down and out against San Francisco, battled all the way back. They came out firing against Green Bay. They ultimately got blown out in that game, but I mean, they were getting pounded by the Bears. They came back in that game. They came back against the Ravens. They did it again last week against Minnesota. And, I just think that this team, that is one thing. I mean, with Dan Campbell, I mean, they do have the mentality that they're going to fight. And, they've kind of adopted that blue collar mentality, that the city of Detroit has. And I just think that if there's ever a time to back the Lions, and I've said I wouldn't do it all year, but I think I'm going to find myself, on the Lions on Sunday plus the 3.5. I really like the hook in this spot. I think that that could come into play. I always hate to take a team that I don't think can win. And I'm not hoping that it's a field goal game. I'd love to see the Lions just win this outright and not have to worry about it. But I think Lions plus 3.5 here. And they've covered some games this year, but I think this is probably for me. That I can actually get behind the Lions and put some money on them. So, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so you bring up a lot of good points, and I think one thing that you may have missed out on that I think you typically look at is who do the Bengals have next week? They have the Ravens, which is probably the biggest game of their season to this point. They've never beaten Lamar. Now, granted, yes, they're coming off that loss, so it's probably not as much of a look ahead as it would be if they won that game. Then also, Cincy, they're a lot better than I expected they would be. But, if you're looking at the teams who they played, now granted, you can only play who's in front of you at this point in the season on the schedule, but they're a combined 4-11. So, it's not like they've been beating, any really solid teams. And I'm with you. Campbell, he cares, like as much of a clown as he is, and I agree. Like, I think, that was probably not a great hire, but he cares and the team plays hard. So, they're a team who I can see getting behind in that sense. But for me, just this is a game that I'd probably avoid. But the one thing though this week is there's a lot of 3.5 point or really short road favorites. A lot of 3.5, 2.5 point road favorites, and that's a spot that I very rarely bet in the NFL, just because those teams have an awful covering rate historically. So for me, it would be Detroit or pass, but this is probably going to end up being a pass game. But I can definitely, with a gun to my head, I would take Detroit, and I can definitely see the case for them.
Stuart, did you have any thoughts on this game? In a game that looked like, preseason, or to start the season may have been, a battle of two really, really bad teams, and the Bengals have kind of impressed a little bit.
Yeah, so I believe in the Bengals' future a lot more than I do the Lions, and maybe that's making me a little bit biased in this game. But just to respond to what you said about Campbell too, a lot of the things you said before, I felt kind of before the season that this was like a ridiculous hire. This guy's a clown, but I'm liking what he's doing. He's got this team fighting. This is a very bad football team, right? When you look at it at a talent perspective, this is one of the worst in the league, just to say it flat out. But he's a motivator. He's not a play caller. But in the NFL, there's two kind of coaches. You got your motivators and you got your play callers. He's not the best strategic coach out there, but he's got this group of guys that aren't very good and are pretty much outmatched in almost every single matchup, especially on the defensive end, more specifically their secondary. He's got them fighting every week. So I give him credit for that. And it's kind of weird. It seems like the books have caught on to the Lions, though. This number feels a little low for me. It feels like it should be -4. The fact that it's -2 in a lot of spots feels like an overreaction to this Dan Campbell effect. So I'll take the Bengals, but kind of sparingly. It's not my favorite spot of the week, but I think they can get the job done. I like Joe Burrow, and the Lions can't take advantage of the biggest weakness of the Bengals, which is their offensive line. They're not going to be able to get pressure on Burrow, despite the fact that the Bengals have a very weak offensive line, and I think that's the difference maker for me.
Well, and you make a lot of good points, and like you said, Burrow. I'm a fan of him, and Burrow versus Goff. Who do you want to go to battle with? But yeah, I think, like I said, unfortunately, I'll find myself on the Lions on Sunday, and I guess if you can snag the Bengals -2, 2.5, we'll root for Bengals -3. So, in the last segment of our show, we're going to give you guys a list of players that we feel could have a big impact on Sunday, and Stuart's going to chime in with some guys that he likes as well. He really likes the player props. So we're going to get his insight on some of that. These players, could help you build your DFS lineup, help you bet some weekly props, anytime touchdown score, first time touchdown score. Last week, we gave out Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, and Antonio Brown. all of who had monster days, finished in the top 5, in their categories. We also had some stinkers in there, but, we did have some guys that, performed well. Antonio Brown maybe being, one of the lesser names, of that list. Those are all, pretty big name guys, but, Antonio Brown had a good game, and part of that may have been credited to, Gronkowski being out. But, Steve, so what'd you have for quarterbacks this week in fantasy? Who'd you have for your top guys?
Yep. So number one, it was actually my pick for the MVP coming into the season. I think he's either the co-favorite now, or I think Allen's actually the favorite. But Kyler Murray, just he's been about as electric as they come. I like the matchup against Cleveland. It's probably going to end up turning into a shootout, even though that Carolina defense or that Arizona defense has been pretty stout. Then we got Rodgers, Mahomes in a big bounce back game against probably the most overrated defense in the league. I mean, that game should have fireworks all over it. You're looking at the worst defense in the league in the Chiefs by far, but actually the second worst is Washington, and I've never seen a more overhyped defense come into a season than that Washington team. I mean, the Chiefs are historically bad, and I mean that may go down as the worst defense of all time if they don't turn things around, which I don't really see how they can, although they've kind of done this before in 2019 and ended up winning the Super Bowl, but this year does feel different. But either way, Mahomes, he's due for a huge game. We got Stafford, and then we got Cousins.
Yeah, so those are, the quarterbacks based on our model that, we expect to have some solid weeks. Stuart, I know we didn't talk much about the quarterbacks. Did you have anything to add on any of these guys that we mentioned? Anything you think stands out from a fantasy perspective or even from a player prop perspective with these guys that we've got listed?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing I do have to say is the Kyler Murray one does worry me a little bit because he re-injured his shoulder a little bit last week, which could be an issue. But on top of that, from everything I've read, it looks like there could be some kind of crazy wins this week in Cleveland. And if anyone remembers what those win games were like last year, they were brutal. So it's something to monitor. I don't want to overreact to it right now. We'll need to see closer to game day. The win reports aren't very reliable a couple of days out, but it does seem like something to put on your radars, because if it gets real gusty, then there's not going to be much throwing going on in that game.
Yeah, you make a great point there.
Yeah. Yeah, because, people always think, rain or snow affects offenses, but it's wind. Like wind is the biggest weather factor by far. So, yeah, definitely got to pull up the weather app.
Yeah. And then for Mahomes, too, I'm definitely on board with Mahomes, and I'm on board with Heineke on the other side of that game, too. I think both of them have a lot of potential to put up a lot of points for the reasons you said before. I'm a Washington football team fan, and I do think this defense does have the potential to turn it around. The talent is there. The scheme isn't there. So I think once we get some firings, maybe a bye week, something like that, I think there is potential for it to turn around. But this is like the best bounce back spot of the season for Mahomes.
Yeah.
I mean, all the hate he's getting right now is a little bit crazy. We're forgetting that this guy still is, if not the best player in football, a top 3 player in football. So I think he gets the job done, and I think he might just set the world on fire for fun, honestly, just go crazy.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that. So some running backs this week. Fantasy model didn't have much in the way of running backs. James Robinson, that game will be going on over in London. Darrell Henderson, Zeke Elliott, and then kind of a sleeper pick, I guess. And this could be maybe a sneaky play in the daily fantasy lineups. Marlon Mack. I think the Colts probably get out to a pretty substantial lead against the Texans. I kind of like the Colts in that game. You might see a little bit more out of Marlon Mack than you might have in a regular game. So, if you're looking for a deep stretch or, you don't have a lot of money in your contest, he might be worth a look. So, Stuart, I know you've got some things to say about the running back position. What do you have?
Yeah, well, one, I like that James Robinson one. I think that's pretty sneaky. I mean, Urban Meyer has this weird obsession with establishing the run in the second half of games. So they go down, they don't do what you think they're going to do, and then out of nowhere they come up the second half handing the ball off to James Robinson about 20 times a game. It's super weird. No clue why they're doing it, but Robinson has everything you want. He has all the touchdown equity. He's a receiving back, even though they haven't quite utilized him to his potential this year, and he's getting the carry. So I love Robinson there. And then beyond that, too, Nick Chubb is a guy that I've targeted a lot this week. So I have him in a player prop at over 85.5 yards already. And I think he will be a great DraftKings play this week. Arizona's been kind of bullied on the ground the last couple games. And they haven't really shown me anything. Like their linebacking core isn't as strong as I'd hoped it would be. They're getting good pressure on the quarterback, but they're not stopping the run as much. So especially if that game does get kind of windy, I think Chubb is going to explode. I mean, Chubb has hit this prop at over 85.5 in 3 out of 5 games this season, but his 2 misses were at 83 and 84 yards. You can't really ask for someone more consistent in football than Nick Chubb.
Yeah, no doubt there. So, Steve, what about wide receivers? What do you have for us this week?
All right. Starting off, we got our guy who we were big on coming into the year. Had a big first 4 weeks. Last week, he really let us down, cost us that game. Not that Darnold was hoping to cause, but DJ Moore. This week, that Viking secondary is certainly susceptible in the on the back end. So Moore, he's a possession guy, but he's also pretty good at picking up some chunk yardage. And Darnold really did struggle last week against that Philly defense, but that was more because of the offensive line and the Philly D line getting pressure. So like he's shown that if he has time, he can get the ball out perfectly fine. And Moore has been by far his favorite receiver. So especially in like a PPR format, I like Moore a lot. Then we got Cortland Sutton.
Monster game last week.
Oh yeah, absolutely monster. And Las Vegas. I mean, that's that's going to be an interesting game. Typically I know that. I mean, especially in the NBA, we like to back teams when their coach is fired, mainly because like NBA is just a lot more of a hustle sport, and other teams taking games off and whatnot. I mean, in the NFL, every team with only 17 games, they're bringing the ultimate effort each week, so it's not like extra motivations in any specific game is really a huge edge. But I mean, we'll see. I mean, will they be dejected? As Stuart talked about, there's some motivational coaches, there's some X and O coaches. Gruden was like the ultimate player coach. I mean, despite what he said, the players still had his back from what it sounded like in the locker room. So I'm sure they're not thrilled about that firing, to say the least. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but I could see the defense being flat in that game. Then we got Michael Pittman Jr. Henry Ruggs. I mean, he's been a big surprise for me. He was the first receiver taken last year. He was a disappointment. The other receivers in that class that was perceived to be a pretty deep class, pretty much exceeded his output. But he's finally been looking like he was worthy of that number one receiver taken last year, and he's a good matchup this week. Devontae Parker, and again, Brissett. Not a huge fan of him, but that Jacksonville defense is easily beatable. And then we got Chase Claypool, who finally emerged last week, and Roethlisberger, he was looking like a dead man walking, through the first quarter of the season. But last week, I saw that was one of his best, or it was his best game since 2017. So, I mean, I don't think that he's back, but against that Seattle defense, talk about bad defenses. My God, I mean, that secondary is atrocious. So, I mean, that could be a game where all the receivers have good games, but I really like Claypool to, have a chance to, I don't know, match what he did last week, but come close.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you say on Claypool there. And then looking at the tight ends, again, not a big list of guys, and not some big name guys, but Cole Kmet for the Bears, Austin Hooper. Again, you mentioned, the win there in Cleveland, so that could play a factor. And then Mo Alley Cox for the Colts. He actually had some very good games last year from a fantasy perspective. And I know they've got Jack Doyle there. Not sure who wins targets more. I've seen both, catch some balls, in that game. My only reservation with him, like I alluded to earlier with Marlon Mack, and it can be beneficial for Mack is, it's a blowout. And, obviously if it's a blowout, maybe Alec Cox doesn't see, a lot of action in the passing game. But, early on last year in games, I know, and that was with Rivers, but, he got a lot of targets early on in those games. I think there was one game he had a couple touchdowns in the first half, and, I think he could have some upside this week. Stuart, who'd you have for tight ends this week?
Yeah, I like the Mo Alley Cox guy. I like the pick right there. He's a good red zone threat, and he's finally starting to see the snap share that you'd hope. So I like that one. And piggybacking off that, I'm going to go on some kind of lower name guys. So I got two guys that I really like this week, and one of them is Ricky Seals-Jones for the Washington football team, and the other one is Dan Arnold for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Ricky Seals-Jones is starting in place of Logan Thomas, who went down with injury. And last week, he actually played on 99% of snaps and ran 42 routes. So for a tight end, that was pretty much top 10 in every major statistical category. He's really out there, and that's what you can ask for with a lot of these lower end tight ends. So Ricky Seals-Jones is someone that I bet to have over 31.5 receiving yards this week, and I also bet him to have over 3.5 receptions. He'll be in a majority of my DraftKings lineups. And the ones that he won't be in, Dan Arnold will be in. Dan Arnold is the guy I bet on last week, and he might be my biggest play of the week, depending on the number we get. Books are still kind of not posting it yet, but I love Dan Arnold. They just acquired him, and they acquired him for a reason. They gave up a former first-round pick who still has plenty of potential to acquire him. It was a bit of a weird move, but in his first game, he only played a couple snaps, still got 2 catches. In his second game, he was already up to 73% of snaps. It's clear they've gotten him involved in this offense, and it's a really bad offense, but they feature tight ends a lot. We saw James O'Shaughnessy have a couple good games before he went down with an injury, and now Dan Arnold is really the only guy in town. He's a pretty good player. He can stretch the field pretty well, so I love Dan Arnold this week. I haven't mentioned him anywhere else, so this will be like the first place I mentioned it, but I love him this week. Great player prop target, great DFS target.
I think you sold me on Ricky Seals-Jones, Stuart. So I guess I saw he was available in one of my fantasy leagues. I had picked up Ertz. I had Dallas Goedert because the Kyle Pitts was on a bye week, with the game back in London. So I guess I need to go snag Seals-Jones up and get him in my lineup.
Love it.
So yeah, Stuart, appreciate you coming on this week. Great insight with the player props and some fantasy perspective, as well as the NFL games, and would love to do it again another time if you're free and available. So like I said, this is a weekly thing that we're going to continue doing. As always, our fantasy guys are based on injury reports, so make sure you check those. Some of these guys may be out come Sunday, so make sure if you've got them in your lineup, you get them out if there are those injuries. And as far as consensus picks go for this week, we will post those on Sunday. Right now, currently the only game that Steve and I agree on is New England, and as you guys heard, Stuart likes the Cowboys in that spot. So we'll tweet those out on our Twitter at SharpBettingOJ on Sunday, and that will conclude our episode for this week. We'll be back next week. Good luck on your bets, and go make some money.